Welcome to the International Conference on Consciousness-Based Leadership and Management from Maharishi International University and co-sponsored by Academy of Management's MSR division. My name is Anil Maheshwari, and on behalf of myself and Dr. Dennis Heaton, co-chairs, welcome to this three-day conference. We will have 15 sessions. This is a second session. We had a wonderful, peaceful session just earlier today. And we hope it'll have an experiential component. We hope you find it really enjoyable for yourself. So this session number 2 will show you you saw the details for this panel. But we will begin this on the, let me share with you again the details for the day. I think that will be useful so you know what other sessions are coming up. You saw session number 2. This is the program for today. We are in session number 2, research papers on organizational culture approaches to oneness and flourishing. Then after this, we will have a couple of keynotes, wonderful keynotes with Dr. Tony Nader, who is head of TM Movement, and he's going to talk about creating inner wholeness as the basis for consciousness-based leadership. And that begins in 2 hours, 2 p.m. Central. And then an hour later, probably around 3:15, we'll have a second keynote speaker featuring another legendary management theorist, Dr. Bob Quinn, and a couple others. And then we'll have a symposium on mindsets. And then towards the end of the day, we'll have another session on research papers. So we'll begin with a 5-minute contemplation or reflection exercise using whatever technique you're familiar with. So please sit back, relax, close your eyes. You can turn off your video if you have video. And then don't worry about the time. I'll remind you when the time is up. And in 5 minutes, I'll let you know. We have a great session, and our moderator is Dr. Raj Shekhar. And we have 7 wonderful panelists talking about organizational cultural approaches to oneness and flourishing. So I'll turn over to my colleague, Vikram Gulati, who will be sharing the presentations from these speakers, and then our moderator will come on and ask them questions and lead to some takeaway points. Vikram, please take it away.
Thank you, Anil. So we'll start the series of presentations. They're all pre-recorded presentations. The first presentation is by Angel Lopez Mutuberria of Case Western Reserve University. And the topic for his paper is how people maneuver through work, life, and the self to find spaces for life meaning. Let me cue this up.
Good morning, everyone. This is Angel Lopez. I'm from Case Western Reserve University. And I'm here to present my research on how people maneuver through work, life, and the self to find spaces for life meaning. I will be speaking a little bit about myself in the context of my research question, what did I study through my literature review, the method section, the emerging results, and the implications. So who am I? I'm a human resources practitioner. I have been working, and I still work as a human resource director for different multinationals. I have 20+ years of experience, and I took a break on my corporate role to study a Doctor of Management back 3-4 years ago, and I graduated last year. So what I will be presenting is basically one of my studies, my first core study. So it's not a surprise that we are living moments of paradigmatic changes. We are seeing extremes in cycles in environment, politics, and economy. We see a world of contradictions between unprecedented levels of material wealth, about the same time not knowing truly who we are. So the real question that I have faced many times in many professionals in how can it be that I have found so many successful professionals, but when I talk to them, they are empty. So that took me to my research question, how do human beings maneuver along the web of life meaning to create well-being? And my literature review has been a fascinating journey that has moved from Plato or the classics on one side up to Carl Jung. Obviously, John Singer plays a very big role in the understanding of Carl Jung. And then I moved into more recent psychology, positive psychology by Martin Seligman. And I ended up with the work of James Hillman and the Akron theory. But the common theme between all of them basically is consciousness and spirituality. So what I have used is a second generation qualitative rank theory, but at the same time, trying to use the constructivism behind the theory, and at the same time, the symbolic interactionism when evaluating how meaning arises from social interaction. The idea of the constructivist grand theory enabled me to assign meaning to the findings of my research. I interview with semi-structured interviews designed with open questions and probes to about 40 plus 41 professionals to put the reasons between the variables of life meaning, feeling of emptiness or alienation, personal calling values, and potential relationship with well-being. My first analytical turn took me to coding. I coded all my interviews, first manually and then using in vivo software version 12. Well, this quote summarizes basically the findings of my study. One of the people told me that always in life there are three legs, which are work, a more private part of oneself, and the family. At a certain point in time, when these three things line up, I see that life makes sense. I would say this is the common theme that lies behind all the interviews that I had. So going into a little bit of detail, the construction and development of the self. One people summarize it very well. This person was the CEO of a company in the US, and that person was struggled through life when he was diagnosed with cancer. Even though he was the CEO, he was very successful. But during the course of the interview, he told me, yeah, there was a time when I worked at the multinational, I had a good salary, a good position, but I felt absolutely empty. This is basically the summary of everything that I have said so far in terms of the context we are living, the hectic times that we are living, the technology that captured all of our attention. And even though this person was very successful, he was absolutely lost as a person. The second important topic that people mentioned was that work must be meaningful, and along with the family, that's which is the next one. These three are the three themes, the three common themes that came around what makes people thrive, the balance between the three of them. So now jumping up directly into the implications. Well, instead of thinking regarding the dichotomy of work life, where there are plenty written, lots of researches, this study proposes to take a more holistic approach of the human being where other dimensions should be taken into account. Work, the self, and family become pivotal in life meaning, letting work be instrumental or mean to accomplish life meaning. So it doesn't contemplate the work or life as a fight of opposites, but work and life meaning as a symbiosis where a rotational triangle with three axes, family, work, and family rotate based on personal circumstances and stages of personal evolution. In terms of human resources, as a practitioner, we have been missing for a lot of time the holistic nature of the human being, especially during these times of when crisis affects us. We have seen that many times people consider us as resources and not as humans. So HR management has been very short-sighted when it comes to considering the uniqueness and holistic nature of the human being.
Thank you, Angel Lopez. Our next presentation is by Jeannel King of Saybrook University, and the topic for this presentation is Not Over, but Through, Towards a New Model for Facilitating Organizational Cultural Change. Let me cue this up.
How would you help an established company move from a change management mindset to true transformation? In this session, I will share my experience as an internal consultant on my work for just that question. I'll introduce the model that I've developed, some implementation and practice insights, and extend an invitation. But first, let's talk a little bit about the company. The company, let's call them Voltaire, is one of the oldest and largest construction companies in the United States. It's traditional, it's risk averse, it's darn good at what it does. Yet Voltaire's leadership has recognized that in order to adapt and thrive in the coming decades, innovation is something that they need to master within the next 5 years. I have been asked to help with that effort. In my initial talks with the Innovation Committee, I noticed that everything was coming from this place of visible organizational culture change. You know, thinking about Shine's model. You do the things, you put the strategies in place, you put the goals and metrics in place, you pull the team together, you put the posters on the wall, you do the communications, and now you get the change. Except as we continued to talk, it became clear that what Voltaire was really seeking was transformation. They wanted to cultivate an innovation ecosystem where employee creativity and ideas could thrive and fuel an innovation effort. And for that type of transformation, we're talking about going through a deeper journey that explores the invisible organizational culture so that we can emerge transformed on the other side. It's not usually a journey that companies willingly jump into. So the question for us was, do we gloss over that deep work that we know is necessary to prime the soil of the ecosystem? Or do we take Voltaire through this process and help them emerge transformed for innovation? The resulting model is an affirmation of the value of going through that process instead of glossing it over. It's a path to partner engagement for innovation, and we call it the two-way bridges model of facilitating organizational transition. It's comprised of 3 different parts. On one level, it's containing a deep respect for the psycho-spiritual journey that we know people experience when they face change in an organization. Now, this is coming from the Bridges transition model for managing change in an organization. We understand that to neglect and ignore that psycho-spiritual journey, it all but guarantees that your change effort's going to fail. So how do we hold this in the proper place for our effort? We turn to Sharma's theory here. We elevate leader consciousness and mindset through opening of the mind to see without judgment, the heart, so that we can truly learn and listen and connect, and the will to step out of our comfort zones and take appropriate action to facilitate transformation. And these two coming together create a container. Here, let me jump to the next one, in which rests the 4D model from Cooper Ryder et al.'s appreciative inquiry process. So we've got the psycho-spiritual being held through in an elevated consciousness container of the leaders. And within that container is supported a transformation engine where Voltaire's employees come together to discover what's working well with innovation, dream what could be possible, design what it could look like, try out those solutions, learn from them, iterate, and with each iteration, we cultivate a more robust ecosystem within the company. I pitched this model to Voltaire's leadership and received unanimous support and backing for its implementation, including from organizational development leaders, which was really cool. So we put together a year one process, taking the TUI Bridges model and parsing it out into what are the actions, what are the events, what are the outcomes, the milestones, the metrics, and then pulling that together into a possible year one implementation process that honors the journey for theory U, the journey for appreciative inquiry, and continues to hold that psycho-spiritual journey at the center of what it does. That turned out to mean that what we're really doing this first year is cultivating the root system of the ecosystem. We're connecting with people one point at a time, one project at a time. And if you look at the image on the left, that's what that root system looked like in 2020 when we started this work. Today, the image on the right tells a completely different story. It is spiraling out, it is evolving, it is healthy and robust, and it's going into areas that we hadn't previously anticipated. So if you are thinking about playing with this model, here are 3 things to keep in mind. Number 1, because this is such a personal experience, cultivate your own qualities of being and embody them, not just in your interactions, but within the processes that you bring to the table. Taking things from a process-heavy approach and transforming them into things that are more person-centered and are honoring the psycho-spiritual journey that folks are experiencing when faced with, requests to become something new and different. Number 2, not everybody is going to be in the same place as you on this journey, and that's okay. Our responsibility is to be mindful and compassionate and aware and be that wise steward, that wise guide to help partners wherever they are in this journey and help them safely navigate to the other side where transformation emerges. Number 3, this type of process is not something you just go and explain, this is what you're going to be doing to your partners. Let them simply experience it. In my world, I tend to talk about come for the food and stay for the pie. That's my personal philosophy for this. I invite people to come in and work with me or team with me. They're coming for the food of the business solutions and results that they need to achieve their goals. They stay for the yummy, delicious pie of how those experiences make them feel. And it feeds their passion, it feeds their souls, and people come back for more. And we're already seeing that happen within Voltaire. TUI Bridges is being requested to be incorporated by leaders of other change efforts within the organization because they see the results and they love how it feels. So what do you see with all of this? Please let me know in the Q&A. I thank you for your attention and look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thank you, Jeannel. Couldn't miss the avatar references there. Our next presentation is from Vikram, that's from me, and Anil Maheshwari. And the topic of this presentation is Ambidextrous Behavior, a consciousness-based development framework. Let me cue this up. Dear friends, welcome to this presentation. The question that we are asking in this paper is whether ambidexterity can be developed, and we are proposing a framework based on the development of consciousness. Over the last 30 years that I have been involved with various business organizations, especially in the information technology space, I have seen that business success is a function of strategy, products, markets, but more importantly, it's a function of the mindset of the leadership team, especially the senior leadership team that really runs the business. And fundamentally, we believe, at least I believe, that there is a deep divide between the way we approach businesses from a mindset perspective and the way we approach our personal lives from a mindset perspective, which is more based on a spiritual kind of orientation. In this paper, Dr. Anil Maheshwari and I actually want to see if we can bridge this chasm, this division between the way we run our businesses and the way we conduct our personal lives. And we have chosen ambidextrity as an example or as a way of trying to create this framework. But what exactly is ambidextrity and what is the context for ambidextrity? So today's business environment is extremely volatile, very uncertain, very complex, very ambiguous, and traditionally we call it the VUCA-driven business environment, VUCA. And COVID-19 has only further accentuated this problem. For organizations wanting to be successful here, they need to be both process-driven, extremely disciplined, and innovative and creative at the same time, which really means they need to be ambidextrous, which is they need to be able to do both things at the same time. And the strategy that they need to follow is what people call organizational ambidextrity. What these organizations need to be able to sort of build on this strategy is ambidextrous leaders and managers. Now, these ambidextrous and leaders and managers need to be able to do both the process-driven part and the creative part, both at the same time. With limited resources, this conflicting priorities, these contradictions of sorts, creates what people have called paradoxical tensions. And these managers need to be able to embrace these paradoxical tensions. They need to be able to do both explorative activities, which are innovative and creative in nature, as well as exploitative activities, which are disciplined and process-driven in nature with equal ease. Charles O'Reilly from Stanford and Michael Tushman from Harvard studied multiple ambidextrous organizations, and they proposed two types of ambidextrity strategies that companies follow in a concurrent manner. The first one is structural ambidextrity. In this strategy, the organization separates out innovation, creative-oriented organizations through a separate division, through a separate structure. The rest of the organization does the more process-driven part of the business, whereas the division for innovation is kind of carved out separately. The role of management here is to really set the priorities and define these structures. The roles of individuals within these two organizations is either to be specialized in exploration or exploitation type of activities, and decision-making is predominantly centralized. The problem with structural ambidextrity is that, to begin with, these innovation divisions do not get the necessary support from the parent organizations. And more often than not, the products and technologies that these innovation divisions create are not smoothly and seamlessly integrated into the larger organization. To overcome this, they propose something called contextual ambidextrity. In this, there is coexistence of both exploration and exploitation within the same organization structure. Individuals on their own decide how to divide their time between exploration and exploitation type of activities. The role of the management is really to define the context within which individuals can set these priorities. Roles of managers are typically more generalist in nature, and the type of decision making is predominantly distributed. So if you look at organizational ambidextrity strategy, it's a combination of both structural and contextual ambidextrity. And what it needs at the lower part of this picture of this figure is they need ambidextrous leadership. And this ambidextrous leadership necessarily needs to have a paradoxical mindset. Now, there's a lot of research that has happened in terms of what are the antecedents for this kind of leadership, what are the consequences, what are the traits of these kind of leaders. But what really drives this kind of a mindset is not completely understood. And more importantly, what can facilitate this kind of a leadership is rather unexplored. So that's really what we're trying to answer in this paper. And we take the help of another paradoxical strategy, which is that of sustainability. For an organization to be able to excel in sustainability, they have to be able to balance the needs from a profit perspective, the social aspect, as well as the environment aspect. And for that, they need people who are able to do this in a way that is seamless, that sort of doesn't compromise on any of these three objectives. And these people, these leaders also have the same type of paradoxical mindset that we have discussed from an ambidextrity perspective. But there is research in this area, and through the research of people like Chris Laszlo of Case Western and Frederick Sau, who's more of a practitioner, they have come to identify that leaders who excel at sustainability leadership, actually all of them are practicing some form of practice of connectedness. And through those practices, they are able to develop higher levels of consciousness, which actually helps them to have that paradoxical mindset, which allows them to be better sustainability leaders. So now we try to combine these two environments, this ambidextrity scenario and the sustainability scenario, and try to see if we can create a framework to answer the question. So on the left-hand side, we have seen how ambidextrity works. The paradoxical mindset is essential for ambidextrous leadership. On the right-hand side, we have sustainability leadership with the paradoxical mindset. And we have seen that development of higher levels of consciousness actually helps people become better sustainability leaders. So the question that we need to ask is, can development of higher levels of consciousness actually facilitate ambidextrous leadership? Can those same practices of connectedness that help people become better sustainability leaders also help them become better ambidextrous leaders? The implications of this are really, really profound, because what this does is it brings consciousness development into the very core of organizational strategy. It brings things like practices of connectedness right into the middle of training and leadership development. Should practices of connectedness become a part of organizational training and leadership? And more importantly, I think what it does is that as people sort of bring consciousness into the core of what they do as a company, these higher consciousness leaders become enablers of the business to become a force for good and really make the businesses more flourishing than ever before. Hopefully this gives you a picture in terms of how development of consciousness and ambidextrity can be connected and become sort of a fundamental organizing principle for businesses to go forward with. We look forward to your questions in the later part of the session. Thank you. Thank you, Vikram and Anil. The next presentation is by Ray Gehani of University of Akron and Sean Gehani of the Rodan Energy Solutions in Mississuaga, Canada. And their topic is Revisiting Ram's Internal Journey with Consciousness, Leadership for Post-Corona Times. Let me cue this up.
Hello, everyone. This is Ray Gehani from Akron, Ohio, and I'm sharing with you an amazing legacy of Ram's leadership, which dates back to 2,600 years ago. I have with me Sean Gehani, who's also inspired by this leadership journey. What do you think of it, Sean, since you are from another younger generation?
Yeah, Ray, for me, obviously I have also grown up listening to, these stories. I've watched various TV adaptations of it. But for me, the biggest thing is there anything here? Is there a takeaway here that we can take and apply it to the modern, the contemporary modern management sciences or management principles?
Very good. I think that's a wonderful point. So let's focus on the takeaways from this. Overall, our roadmap is what's the impact of pandemic? And then what's the significance? And the major takeaway to focus here is what's the significance of our inner landscape or consciousness? It has been highlighted by Jung and others before, but there are very few leadership studies which focus on consciousness. Most of the studies are based on material-based leadership, like performance for pay. We'll talk about the book, and then I also have rewritten the book in 2020 in terms of 74 stories. We'll discuss the research study where we'll look at an interlinking of inner journey and outer journey, limitations, and then future implications. We all know what COVID did. It quarantined us, it socially distanced us, it forced us to spend more time with ourselves. And some people are actually scared of doing that. Now, where is the research gap? Most of the research is on exterior and material-based leadership. There are very few leadership studies connecting to consciousness, very little connection on how to measure consciousness or what's the consciousness action gap. And I've tried to do it by looking at Gandhi's leadership and Ram's leadership. Now, Valmiki Ramayana is the oldest, but there are 300 Ramayans, and maybe mine is the latest with the stories. Now, we go to the childhood stage, and this is just to highlight that Ram tried to be the perfect leader. So he's often called the perfect person. Now, the takeaway is that Ram focused not only on his muscular body and mind and intellect, but he also focused on his contemplative mind. And he's been highlighted as a very thoughtful leader. In stage 2, as a young adult, he was asked for help by rishis. He got married and he was about to be coronated when suddenly his stepmother wanted him for an exile, and the father didn't want to fulfill that, but Ram wanted to uphold the father's promise. Now, the takeaway here is how attachment can cause suffering, which is also the Buddhism theme. And what he also noticed is, and his father dies of grief of missing him. And we also notice how his stepbrother is not at all connected to the material world. Stage 3 in the forest, the takeaway is he spends a lot of time with his brother, devoted brother, who's like a shadow. He's almost a metaphor for his body. And he realizes how disciplining the body is almost as important as other aspects. Stage 4, his wife, in the previous stage, his wife gets abducted. And in this stage, they have no army, they have no weapons. So they collaborated with monkey men, and he meets with Hanuman, who is a symbol of a servant leader, completely devoted. And Ram learns a lot by looking at how devoted Hanuman is. Stage 5th, they attack Lanka, and the brother of the evil king Ravan sort of surrenders to Ram, and Ram learns how he sustained his spirituality even though he was in this greedy material world of Ravan in the golden Lanka. The 6th stage is about the battle, and Ram prevails over much mightier military force. And Ram notices that even though Ravan has 10 heads, which is equivalent to 10 PhDs, but he's so perverted and egotistic as a result of that, that he really does not listen to anybody else and eventually goes down as a result of that. Now, the 7th stage, the final stage, is they go back home. But here, Ram has a very ambivalent relationship with his wife because he wants to test her faithfulness. And it doesn't end, it ends in a tragic event. Now, what are the takeaways? The takeaways are, Whereas we see a lot of things in our exterior journey. What matters is what happens at the consciousness level. And ideally, if we can contemplate and reflect what we experience outer, we are probably going to have a deeper impact on the world around us. Gita calls it Karam Yogi, but we can call it action-based leadership. It's a deeper values-based leadership rather than results-based leadership. So I think we can learn a lot from that. Some implications, it's a translation from an ancient language, and then there are a lot of cross-cultural interpretations, and we need to do a few more research studies on that. What do you think, Sean? What do you take away from this as you listen to this presentation?
Right. So the one I would like to sort of hone in on is the integral leadership aspect. And in fact, maybe it's a counter question to you in the contemporary context, or perhaps for a practitioner of management today. What does integral leadership look like?
So, for example, Steve Jobs is a very good example. He used to do Zen Buddhism and used to contemplate. And this is why most of his, radical innovations came from some of his reflections. He used to take long walks. So there are a number of other leaders who really delve in. The founder of Men's Warehouse, Hewlett Packard, Toyota, a lot of these companies feel that the inner landscape is as important as what they experience outside. So hopefully we will have more questions during our presentation and we can deal with that. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Hope people will enjoy it too.
Thanks, Ray.
Hello, everyone. This is
Thanks, Ray and Sean. Sorry, I think I rewound for a moment, but thank you so much for the presentation. The next one is from Norway. So we have Gry and Beate joining us from the WID Specialized University in Norway. And I'm told one of them, Beate, is in a mountain cabin. So it'll be interesting. So let me cue this up.
Hi, my name is Gry Espedal, and I am an associate professor at WID Specialized University, together with
me. Hi, I am Beate Jelstad Løvaas, and I'm associate professor at WID Specialized University in Norway as well. WID is a faith-based university, and we are both teaching at the master program of value-based leadership.
We have submitted a paper for the MIU conference entitled Creating Organizational Space of Hope Through Value-Conscious Practices. We will here talk about why this study, what motivated this study, what is the study about, and how was the study conducted. We discovered that during the corona pandemic, our management students were actually part of transformative activities. In a time of uncertainty, they were actually hoping. They were not paralyzed by uncontrolled situation, but were acting on compassion and establishing meaningful situation of hope. How did they do that?
And this is the background for our two research questions, where we ask, how do managers in times of crisis create spaces of hope? And what are the underlying mechanisms facilitating these processes of hopes in organizations? So as such, we investigate what the managers do and how these actions have emerged. And how did we do that? This empirical research is based on two data sources. The first is 24 essays written by 12 managers during the COVID-19 pandemic. and the other is focus group interview with managers. And for analyzing data, we used thematic analysis that were inspired by a narrative approach. And both authors independently developed initial coding and thereafter discussing and developing new codes and categories. We treated coding as a starting point rather than an endpoint, in which new questions derived from the coding process. An example of a question derived from the coding process was, what are the drivers to these changes in actions among the managers? And this question was later added as a second research question of this study, actually.
When it comes to findings, we analyzed the managers' essays and the focus group interview. It was possible to establish an understanding of how the leaders were organizing for hope in a crisis situation. By connecting research on crisis management and positive organizational leadership, we discovered a dynamic and relational process of hoping. Instead of dealing with negative emotions, the leaders enhanced a process of noticing the despair, searching for meaning and appropriate actions to establish horizons of possibilities. We discovered a process in 4 phases, as the model shows. First, the leaders were noticing the despair. The managers were experiencing the corona pandemic as a traumatic situation. They did not feel they were prepared for this and had to change many work practices and routines. Despite the lack of control, they noticed the emotions involved, emotions of despair. Second, we saw the managers in a situation of deconstruction were searching for platforms to reconstruct meaning. The leaders looked upon themselves as positive force and started to search for needs of the organizational members. Third, the managers used different arenas to enhance the action of hoping in recognizing the situation and enact compassion. They used small encounters with organizational members to listen and recognize what was happening. Finally, through this conscious work, they established a horizon of hope and possibilities of the organizational members as a form of sensibility of the situation. They brought hope into the situation by tracking what was going well despite the challenging situation and finding what could be life-giving, flourishing forces in the situation.
And then we asked what facilitated these processes of hope, or in other words, what were the underlying mechanisms facilitating these processes? And we discovered that processes of hope were facilitated among others through group reflections in safe spaces. And we discovered how these reflections in safe spaces with slow thinking and also identifications with others make us move inwards and getting the courage to move forward by taking new steps of actions. So we discovered how group reflection in safe spaces enabled value-conscious practices in organizations.
And then we will end by saying thank you for listening.
Thank you, Gri and Beate. Our next presentation is by Mohan Gurubhatam from Help University in Malaysia, but who's right now actually in Fairfield, Iowa. So let me cue this up for you. And before I go, the topic for this presentation is Wisdom Towards Unity and Fine-Grained Discrimination in Developing Managerial Talent in the 21st Century.
Welcome to everyone. And let me share my screen. Here we go. Talk about developing wisdom towards unity with fine-grained discrimination in managerial talent in this century. I'm a professor of management at the Entrepreneurship Leadership and Management Graduate School in Malaysia at Help University, and also adjunct faculty at Maharishi International University at MIU. Now we are in an era of discontinuous change. That means it's bumpy. There are an onslaught of drivers. Basically, drivers are morphed or evolved from trends. They don't just last longer. They are in your face. They have clout. They are basically things which can't be ignored. If we ignore the drivers, the change drivers, it's at our peril. Examples of change drivers are technology. I'm speaking to you via Zoom, and this will be a conference where people can actually Zoom in and participate. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., I have a class in Malaysia, 12,000 miles away. It's synchronous. And this is a collapsing of time and space. We say geography is history. Outsourcing is very well known for 20 over years. We have people in India who are analyzing X-rays and MRIs, working on financial analysis. They turn it around as higher value-added interpretation with insights, and somebody in Wall Street or a hospital in Rochester benefits from those higher value-added insights. So this is how technology changes the way we work and learn. A whole shift in our millennial generational values. Students are actually very conscious about topics. They want to be stimulated. They're very conscious about the employers that they want to work for. We have employer branding. I'm supervising thesis. It's corporate reputation, fair trade. They're very conscious about the foods they eat and the carbon emissions, which brings us to sustainability, which is also very much in our faces. Basically, we can't afford to ignore them, right? Global warming is a worldwide phenomenon. There's even regulation. And that's characteristic of drivers. They kind of morph into regulations. We can't ignore them. We ignore them at our peril. I'm just taking a time check. All right, so next is basically, in ancient times, we cut to the Kurukshetra war with Arjuna being paralyzed in action because these change drivers in our modern times can paralyze us. They are impacting us in parallel. They are impacting us in an accelerating way, as Thomas Friedman said in his book, Thank You for Being Late. But even in ancient times, we have this hero Arjuna who was paralyzed into inaction. And Krishna tells him, Nivatatvam, transcend. That means unfreeze from the conventional narrative. Unfreeze from his moral and ethical dilemma, to kill or not to kill. So what is transcending? This is the bubble diagram from Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, which was published in The Science of Being and Art of Living in 1966. Basically, what it means is it involves transcending from the surface level of thinking to more refined layers into the source of thought of pure consciousness, or the unified field, called Turiya in Sanskrit, the fourth state of consciousness distinct from waking, sleeping, and dreaming. This is the surface level of the mind. We dive inwards vertically, effortlessly, and we experience deep rest, and we expand the conscious thinking capacity to finer and finer levels of the mind. Even the fine level or layer of thinking is transcended to no thoughts, unbounded pure awareness, inner wakefulness. Robert Keith Wallace dubbed this restful alertness, and it is actually characterized by a wakeful hypermetabolic state, which means restfulness and wakefulness. Here we see a paradigmatic model of how thinking, when it's transcended, goes to this pre-paradigm state of pure consciousness. Basically, at the unified field, a source of thought, its transcendental consciousness, is the basis of paradigms, which are in turn the basis of schemas, which support assumptions, theories, and concepts. As we dive in vertically, our concepts and theories are nested upon assumptions which we often are not conscious of. They shape our biases and prejudices. Our schemas are larger mental structures like filing systems in the mind. Our paradigms are worldviews. They are the basis of schemas, assumptions, theories, and concepts. By the time we get to assumptions, the assumptions level, it's very unconscious. We need to, expand the conscious thinking capacity of the mind vertically to make our thought processes more transparent. And by the time we arrive at our paradigms, our worldviews, it can be stressful. But transcending through TM, my experience and my students' experience is very effortless. And they arrive at the source of thought, and they often report that this is a pre-paradigm state, and they are able to frame new normal situations, conflicts, and so on, with a fresh, untainted view. It does enable even the old worldviews. It adds a new insight, but also to be able to say, we haven't seen anything like this before with this onslaught of change drivers. So much new things are happening in the world, so much conflict. My religion is better than yours, my philosophy, my political system, my culture. Then we transcend all of these things and we find there's a unification. And this unification is at the deeper level, at the level of the unified field, accompanied often by a feeling level that is very refined. It's not just cognitive and thinking, but a very refined feeling level. In fact, I believe in Vedic cognition, feeling is at a very refined level. It's not separate, but part and parcel of cognition. So we transcend with our intuition, we transcend the ego, and we experience this unity in diversity. And this is how we are able to frame very, very many higher order thinking phenomena, like evaluating diversity, right? This white panel, the top right, is basically higher order thinking. It's not the same as lower order thinking, which is here, which is bounded, which can be automated by artificial intelligence. Research by Oxford University and Martin, excuse me, in the UK, and the World Economic Forum and Google all point to higher order thinking, team management, creativity, problem solving as the future, right? A lot of the other skills which are routine and whose impacts in terms of competencies are not far reaching can be automated. The ability to think out of the box is called metacognition, being able to reflect, but transcending is even more meta, if you will. And I can find managers, I can take them out from oil and gas or logistics, I can put them into financial services and find they will thrive. It's not the functionality, it's not the domain, it's almost like a floating intelligence system, it's random access. And if we unpack it, this is basically fluid intelligence, which subsumes in what we know in empirical evidence-based research as fluid intelligence, which subsumes contextual intelligence, cultural intelligence. This is all enabled by expanding our conscious thinking capacity to transcendence so that we have broad comprehension and sharp focus and superfluidity with far-reaching impacts. Our managers must be able to thrive in any context, any industry, from one organization to another, in one industry to any industry. It doesn't matter which industry they come from. This is what talent management is telling us. It's not the domain, it's not the functional skills which can be automated. So I shall leave more for discussion and questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mohan, for that presentation. The next presentation that we have, I would like to call it more of a conversation, because that's perhaps the only presentation that does not have PowerPoint slides. So this is a presentation, and the title of the presentation is Learning from Relational Ontologies Through Head and Heart, an Exploratory Collaborative Autoethnography. And the presenters are the George Washington University group led by Julia Stauber-Walter, Christian List, Hermela Tekle, and Devang Liu. Okay, let me cue this up for you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Stauber-Walker, and I'm so thrilled to be here with my colleagues from George Washington University. And before I describe the study, I'd like to ask each of them to introduce themselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm Devang Liu, and I go by Mike. I'm a second-year doctoral student at George Washington University.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ella Tekle, and I'm a second-year doctoral student at the George Washington University.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christian List and same.
Awesome. And so we're here to talk about an interesting little phenomenon we just experienced. But the background is we've been working together since January on a collaborative autoethnographic study. We've met several times. We've had transcriptions, we've had journaling, we've followed explicit CAE methods defined by Chang et al., who's one of the noted scholars in this area. And the research focus was to try to understand how we learn in community through enacting a relational ontology. So it does connect to consciousness development, and that's why we're here talking about it at this conference. However, we just did a dry run to present our findings to you all, and the recording turned out to be 18 minutes long. And it was a beautiful recording, and we each offered heartfelt learnings and gratitude to each other. But we can't submit that because it's over the time limit. So we're going to talk about that experience and show you what CAE is like in the moment as we're learning and reflecting. So would someone like to describe their experience in doing the recording and what is coming up for you now?
I can start quickly. CAE work to me, especially for the recording we just did, is like an ongoing process of learning, and it embarks me inside energies. And when I reflect on what we have done just now, is something we need to be cautious when we share our thoughts together. We are easily going too much over our expectation, and a lot of time when we exchange information together, new information emerge and new emotion emerge, and that facilitates our discussion and ongoing reflection.
I can go next quickly. So doing the recording, especially the gratitude part, was just, I felt like my heart lit up. It was just so amazing. I just felt this new sense of energy that I know it was 18 minutes, but it was an amazing video. And just being limited with time is just a very interesting thing. So I'm gonna let Christian go.
Sure, thanks, Ola. Yeah, the recording, it was for me, another piece of diving into your lives that I did not. It just furthers our exploration. For instance, Mike shared in the recording that he thought some identity of mine was revealing to him, and he was further interested in what that meant going forward. And to me, I didn't know that he felt that way until he said it in our in our final recording. So it just proves that we're never done in this CAE. The project can be done, but as far as the relational aspects of it go, you continue it on and you explore, and that's what an exploratory CAE is all about. And I am appreciative of all of my co-members in exploring with them together.
Awesome. So Ella, what is the time that we have at this moment?
We have 2 minutes, 30 seconds left.
2 minutes, 30 seconds. So that would be 120, 150 seconds, probably now 140 seconds maybe. And so what I want to say is I'm so appreciative of my colleagues jumping in here, because what you're witnessing is people making sense in relationship with each other and being able to show up fully and authentically and learn from and with and through each other's experience. The other thing I'd like to share is this idea of liminality came up for us. And I think we're all, in this recording, in this liminal space, right? Because we know people are going to be watching, but what we're trying to do is enact in front of you what our CAE is like. So does anyone have a comment to share about what this enactment is before we close? What is enacting? Go ahead, Chris.
Sure. I mean, during our CAE, we talked about doing identity. And in the context of all of us being in higher education, as graduate students and graduate faculty, you know, doing identity is, as a graduate student, is communing with each other as thought partners. And so doing this is very much sort of a small sample of what it's like to be relational, especially in a cohort style academic environment like this.
Thank you, Christian. Mike or Ella, before we close out?
I can quickly share a thought. I think like the CAE work is like, also the enacting is like a ignition. It's like we are lighting up the fire on the grassland, and that is facilitating us to understand what we are directing to and where we are going forward. And the CAE is like the flag we can follow, and it helps us to identify the relationship between us and help us to establish a relationship together.
Awesome. Ella, what's the time?
It's time.
It's time. All right. So here we have it from the George Washington University CAE team. Stay tuned because we are lighting fires everywhere we go. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to turn the recording off.
Thank you, Dr. Julia Stauberg and team. Sorry to have put you under that pressure to have 8 minutes, but as a result of that, we have now 7 presentations done in 58 minutes. So would request all the participants to turn on their cameras. So Dr. Gehani, Dr. Mohan.
Okay, thank you, Vikram. And I just wanted to invite, thank you all for great presentations. I want to invite Dr. Rajshekhar to take over and ask questions of the panelists and then come to some takeaway points. Thank you. Rajshekhar.
Thank you, Anil, for having me on here in the role of a moderator. Indeed, it's a daunting task when you look at the huge intellectual wealth that has been presented in such a short span of time. Well, I did go through all the papers, but then reading the papers is one thing, and actually listening to these highly condensed presentations live is quite another. So yes, we do have questions, and I look forward to asking the questions to each of the researchers and presenters, but probably a little bit of the overarching view, and then I will get into delving with each of the presenters, certain key areas that would be of great value to the audience and to us. So the overall theme that we have for the papers here is organization culture approaches, essentially meaning that what kind of tools, processes, and methods can be applied to organizations, and we are all members of organizations, which is a truism that needs no repetition. However, I think the larger organization that we all belong to, which is society, is under a huge amount of pressure these days on account of Corona. And therefore, I would be, the bend of my questions would be, how can we apply it to society? While, of course, all your research work is controlled within organizations, yet, that's the stretch question that I would have. And therefore, I really look forward to insights from each one of you as you kind of internalize your own research and externalize it to a larger audience, which is society, which we all know all across the world is undergoing a huge amount of pressure. And therefore, that's going to be the tenor. So with those opening remarks, I would like to actually put the question to the presenter of the first paper. It was on how people maneuver through work, life, and self to spaces for life meaning. It was by Angel, Dr. Angel Lopez Mutuberria. So if I could request him to come online. Where is he? I can't see him. Oh, I think, yes, there he is. Yeah, I can see him very clearly. So the question to you, sir, so first of all, thank you very much for a wonderful paper, wonderful presentation. So my question to you is like this. Based on your research, which was primarily on HR professionals, but extending it beyond the limitations and the function of HR to include the other functions in business, in your opinion, what two principles should all businesses apply to maneuver and generate life meaning? And how would this lead to human oneness and flourishing?
Yeah, thank you for the questions, and thanks a lot for the opportunity to present and to give you my opinion. Well, clearly, psychology moved at a point in time from the study of the soul to the study of personality, and that has influenced management as well, and management has influenced HR management. So if instead of focusing on the study of personality, we would go back to the study of the soul, we would contemplate the multidimensionality of the human being. That is what has been missing in corporations and in management in general. So the first recommendation that I would have is that go back to the study of the multidimensionality of the human being, go back to the study of the soul. Employees are expecting work meaning and meaningful workplace as well. So when the multidimensionality of the human being is considered, we open the possibility to managing, to coaching with compassion. We open the possibility to managing and be open to consciousness. And we open the possibility to human flourishing.
Yeah. So yes, I understand what you're saying. Essentially, you're saying we need to go back to the roots of psychology, which is the study of the psyche and the soul. And therefore, that would help us in moving forward in this direction. Thank you so much, Angel. We'll, of course, come back to you, when we go in a loop. So I'm now going to pose my second question to the researcher and presenter of paper number 2, which is not over but true towards a new model of facilitating organizational culture and change by Jeannel. So Jeannel, here I am. And here's my question to you. So looking through the model that you created, the 2 images model, and looking through that, not over that, to the horizons of the 21st century, businesses as well as society, what additional principles would you think would work towards human oneness and flourishing?
Ooh, good question. Thank you, Rashikar. So I know that Stanislav Grof talks about how our worldview creates our world. And I think that as we look out in the 21st century, businesses have a rising awareness of their responsibility to the earth and to each other. And so we've got that, and then we bring in spirituality, right? Which, if you want to put it into a corporate setting, is our quest for wholeness, right? Our quest for oneness. And that's speaking to this aspect of, we're all in this together, we're all affected, we're all interconnected. And one of the speakers in the first session, Dr. Singh Gupta, said this thing that has burned itself in my brain. The journey is inward for external excellence. And I think that's what the 2E Bridges model is ultimately seeking to facilitate. It's that human oneness and flourishing through to a flourishing business through understanding of the self and elevation of one's consciousness, embracing of one's spirituality. So other principles that come into play then could be social harmony, glorious imperfection, inherent goodness, spiritual ecology, where all of these things, and when I talk about social harmony, I'm talking about things where there's inclusion and collaboration and co-creation, equity, respect. Glorious imperfection is that diversity and validation, adventure, curiosity. Inherent goodness is, seeing people as having intrinsic value and intrinsic dignity, and spiritual ecology, bringing us back to that interconnection and wholeness. Our businesses flourish when their people flourish. And if a business's culture is the container in which these beings work and live and play, then ultimately the principle that we're really talking about, I think, is love. Love is the soil where people are able to grow and thrive. When our people grow and thrive, businesses grow and thrive. And they're able to achieve not just their business goals, but actually contribute something meaningful and powerful to their societies. Did I just knock you off your feet? Where did you go?
I think that's okay. I think we lost the connection to Rajshekhar. I'll just check whether he's still as an attendee and we can bring him back. Just give me 30 seconds.
Okay, meanwhile, I can take on some of the questions that there's a request to take on questions from the audience. There's one question toward the end about atheism, so I thought it would be a good opportunity while we work on this. I think atheism and theism is a lot about religion, where spirituality transcends theism. I think that's one question from Sunil. So can great leaders, do they have to be theists and, I think certain amount of spiritualism means like believing in a higher thing would be important for being a great leader. So Sunil, that was your question, I think. And anybody else wants to answer any other question from the audience while we're waiting, would be great.
Well, I know that there were some questions popping up for me from Marley Sparks, was asking about, this seems to be a catch fire process, and does it work if it comes top down? Yes, and.
I'm back. Sorry. I just lost connection, but of course, we are all connected through consciousness, so we are back. So I did hear a little bit of your answer, but I will presume that the broader intent was that what happens within an organization does spill over to society, because business is a unit of society, and therefore the good that we do through your model is likely to benefit society too. So thank you so much, Jeannel, for your thoughts. Now let me turn to Vikram, and of course his paper was on ambidextrous behavior and consciousness-based development. So my question to Vikram, and there he is. Yeah, there are so many figures, I have to figure out where you are. I can see you there. So the question is, what are the implications of corporate as well as structural ambidexterity beyond corporations and businesses? How would it help individuals, families, and society?
Sure. So I think the whole thesis is that it's not just companies that benefit, it's companies and individuals that benefit. And the environment that I'm working with is more of a to-be environment, a future environment, which actually COVID has accelerated us to actually see that future much earlier than perhaps what we would have. There are two things that are happening. One, technology is pushing decision making lower and lower within the organization, right? So that's one clear thing happening. Second, the need for those managers, and I'm not talking about C-level people, I'm talking about mid-level managers, their need to be context sensitive, their need to have situational awareness is today much, much higher than it has ever been before. And that's what leads to ambidextrous behavior. And if we can show that practice of connectedness and development of consciousness actually helps them do their job better by being more ambidextrous, then the consciousness development part becomes, like Jeannel said, the pie that they have left over, right, while they're doing their job, and they become enablers of change towards a more flourishing reality. Because once you are in that paradigm of developing your own consciousness, even if the goal to begin with was more about becoming more ambidextrous, about more context switching, about being more situational aware, once you're down that path, the pie of actually developing your consciousness and being a positive contributor to not just the company, but to yourself, to your family, is just an obvious implication of that. So it's really trying to solve both problems through sort of a Trojan horse, if you may.
I have a little follow-up question, which was kind of unplanned.
I think, Raj, you will need to move on. You've got 10 minutes to cover everybody else.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. I think I've been carried away by my enthusiasm. Okay, so let me go to paper number 4, and that is Revisiting Ram's Internal Journey, Dr. V. Gehani. And my question to you, sir, is, from your study of Ram's internal leadership journey, what principles will contribute most to the post-corona world that we are all going to be getting into now?
Well, so in the paper, the first quarter of the paper is about the impact of COVID, right? The social distancing. It all made us spend more time with ourselves. And therefore, it forced us to look at more our intangible side compared to the usual tangible external side. So I think we are set, and a lot of people are realizing that there is an inside. Most of the time we were running around, we were numbing ourselves by, on this treadmill of life. So I think COVID has made us realize that, are you comfortable being in your skin, as Shakespeare said? So I thought COVID facilitated that to a certain extent. What do you think, Sean?
You're on mute, Sean.
Yeah, I think the question was specifically from takeaways from Ram's journey specifically. And for me, being a practitioner of management, the obvious one was integral leadership. So what's prevalent right now in the paradigm today is outcome justifies action. And I think that there's a real case to be made to shifting that paradigm towards action explains outcomes. So that's the sort of leadership model that I think can be practiced, as you put it, Rajshekhar, in units of society or society at large. The challenges remain, and I was watching the questions in the chat there as well, is how do you measure consciousness? So that's some of the further work. I'm not an academic, but I encourage dialogue in that direction. Is how do you measure consciousness if that is the paradigm that we're gonna shift towards?
And I answered Dennis, so yeah, you got the answer. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Ray Gehani and Sean Gehani, for your responses. I will now move to the 5th paper, which was by Gree and Beate. So my question to them is, based on your research, which was on organizational spaces of hope, through value conscious practices, how can we create societal spaces of hope? Because that again is required for human flourishing and oneness, as well as in the context of our current situation.
Well, thank you, Rajshekhar, for a very interesting question. I do think that we, in the time we have now, it's really important for us to reflect and being conscious of what is happening around us. And I do think that these safe spaces that we can establish through reflections can actually move us a little bit forward. And also, and through these safe spaces, I think it is possible for us to establish hope. And hope is something that we do together. It's not only to put up a vision or something that we are looking for. It's actually what we are doing together. And that was what one of the things that we saw in the study that we have was that people were actually doing things together. And that was when they were establishing hope. So this is a way to have safe spaces is a way that we can flourish the society as I see it. What do you say, Beate?
Yeah, I would like to add, in these safe spaces of reflections, there is one mechanism of identifications. It allows for identification, being identified or identifying with others. Those two, both ways, will kind of establish courage to move forward, and we can do hope together. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful. So I saw one of the comments, hope creates contagion. I think that's the key. Hope creates a spreading factor, which helps. Okay, now I move to the last paper, or not the last paper, the second last one, by Professor Mohan Raj Gurupadam, which was Wisdom Towards Unity and Fine-Grained Discrimination. So my question to you, sir, is looking at the post-corona world through the lens of higher order thinking and fluid intelligence, which you had mentioned in your presentation, what principles do you see operating to create a society which would be based on oneness and human beings flourishing within it? So you have to unmute.
Here we go. First, we need to understand the era we're in. Even before COVID came along, the pandemic was actually scoped as one of the exogenous drivers which will impact us. So it was captured, and the World Health Organization is predicting even more. So the others are terrorism and the rise of emerging markets. So the idea of continuous change that we experienced in the last century is gone. We are in an era of discontinuous change, which means disruption, a very bumpy ride. So hang on to your seats, you ain't seen nothing yet. And this will continue for the next at least 15 years. That means it's going to be very stressful. For the post-corona world, what it has brought, what COVID has brought to awareness is we need to transcend the conventional narratives. We are so interconnected. Every action has consequences. Shifting back to the transcendental paradigm, consciousness is the basis of thinking, which in turn is the basis of action. And then echoing what Vikram and Anil were saying in their paper, we need to be in a ambidextrous mode. This is also in the paper I wrote. We need to be able to have fine-grained discrimination, and then to know that some things can be universally applied and some things have to be locally administered with wisdom. So unity is not uniformity. Unity is not sameness. Differentiation precedes integration. Different strokes for different folks. One size does not fit all. We're all intimately connected. Health is a basic factor which we need to take seriously. At the same time, we know value systems are different. But at some level, we transcend the conventional narrative. We transcend means we transcend. We're not getting stuck in definitions, concepts, schemas, and so on. We need to unpack this to go to this pure level of unified field level consciousness, and then realize that diversity comes from it. And then we need to be able to act in a very nuanced way locally, as well as in a very pragmatic way universally. And so this has been accelerated by COVID. If you read the paper, there's lots of examples. I have a Japanese student now who's zooming in with me. He's in Bangkok, he's watching this. And we're exposed to this. It's impossible to explain to anyone
Thank you, Mohan.
Diversity there is here.
Thank you, sir. I think we had a fairly understanding of the way in which fluid thinking will move on. And I'm now going to pose my question to the group that spoke about collaborative autoethnography. So let me ask the question in a very simple way. It was my first experience of observing such group dynamics in place. And therefore, how can we use this technique to further the feeling of unity in society and the feeling of hope in society?
Thank you. We're each going to answer this in 1 or 2 sentences. Go ahead, Ella, sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Dr. Julia. Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. That's a very broad topic, but I'll try to keep it simple and encourage you all to read our paper. So the collaborative autoethnography allows a deeper and more profound and a transformative change through learning in relation with others, and that unites the cognitive learning with the embodied action. So specifically for our group, the lived experiences that we all shared in the CAE work allowed us to foster a deeper consciousness of transcending paradigms and understand the self in relation to others to create a meaningful and flourishing experience of oneness and reciprocity. I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Mike, to share his reflection with us.
Thank you, Ella, and thank you, Dr. Krishnan. So CAE, for me, is a mirror to see ourselves, our true self, through constant interactions with others, and it enriches our understanding of ourselves, urges us to be inclusive, and inspires us with emerging thoughts and views, which makes us better, unique individuals that complement the human oneness. That is similar as people said, like, unity is not like a uniformity, is not sameness, is exactly complement the whole humankind. Right? Thank you, and I'll pass to Christian.
Thank you, Mike. CAE creates dedicated time to both mutual and reciprocal mean-making, transcending individual paradigms and institutional Western ways of knowing. For us, CAE has enabled the shared exploration of our experiences, deepening our commitment to question our own assumptions of what it means to occupy space, time, and identity as relational beings. Julia?
In wrapping up, my comment is because CAE blurs the artificial distinction between self and community, it has the potential to catalyze both individual and community transformation through intention, witnessing, and dialogue. CAE is aligned with the most current thinking in quantum theory, relational ontology, indigenous research, and posthumanism. These philosophies decenter the human as the knower or the namer of all things and make space for the emergence of dignity, reciprocity, and flourishing for all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia and your team, for having given us a live taste of what CAE is. And as I reach the end of this moderation, I am reflecting over all your answers, and two things come out as significant common threads. The first thing is, all change begins inside, and we need to obviously find mechanisms and tools and processes which will, in our particular societies, be able to trigger that. Societies are different, as one of the panelists said. Unity and uniformity are two different things, and therefore we need to figure out how to handle processes for different societies, but the unifying theme being to help consciousness emerge. That is one that I could see. The second thing that I see is that each one of us needs to be the change that we want to see, because we ourselves are nodes of tremendous energy, and our responsibilities as researchers is tremendous, because the ideas we create and the successes we create actually roll down further to businesses and society. So, I applaud all of you for the great work you've done, for the intellectual prizes that we've been seeing here. And with that, I hand over to Anil, and thank you so much for the opportunity to moderate this session.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Raj, and thank you for everybody for joining. So we're so delighted. I think Raj just covered some two very high-level points, and I saw in the chat there are a lot of discussion, and I think some people said that there's so many perspectives covered in so little time. So I hope it inspired a lot of reflection, a lot of thought, a lot of learning, and so we're delighted. And then this is just second, of the 15 sessions, so learning is going on. We really appreciate, and please, there's a link posted. I think Vikram posted. Vikram, can you just post that again for giving feedback? That feedback will be helpful. What you like, what should we do? What should we do more of? I think the link is already there, but you can do that. Can you do that, Vikram? Yeah, SurveyMonkey link. If you could please click on that or give in chat, SurveyMonkey.com/ should say ICCL. No, not 308. It's the wrong one. It should be 002. No, I think let me give you the 1 second. Do you have the correct link, Vikram? The one says 02. Yes. Danny Sandra just posted. Thank you, Danny. Danny's a Sharda student and a PhD, and he's been quite a lifesaver, so appreciate it. So you see that link at the very bottom, so SurveyMonkey ICCL M02, please, if you could give us feedback, everybody, that'd be great. No link, if you click on that. All right, so let me see, why is that not linked there? Anyway, otherwise you have to.
It does work.
It does work?
Yeah, but it has to be shared with everyone, I think.
Yeah, the link works. So if you could please take a moment to do that. Now we would be just taking a couple of minutes break and then open up again for session 3A, which I can just give you a flavor of while you're working on this thing. It'll be a conversation with Dr. Tony Nader, MD, PhD, head of TM movement worldwide. And he'll be discussing this idea of creating inner wholeness as the basic of consciousness-based leadership, which is kind of what we ended with the main point of, right? Change begins within, and we need to be the change. So how do we create the inner wholeness? Okay. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining. And we look forward to joining in the next few minutes in the next panel, which will begin at the top of the hour at 2 p.m. Central. Thank you all.